Hey everyone, welcome back to our second episode of the remaining legendary lords. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Wood Elves, and the Wood Elves have a fairly surprising number of lords left, though many of them will likely never appear outside of perhaps mod editions. This is going to be a very long one, however, and that's even with trimming some of the picks out. Trimming, like a tree, get it? More so than other factions, the Wood Elves are very easy to justify bringing the dead back to life with. In fact, several of the alive legendary lords down below have died multiple times in the lore. It's just one of the things that Athel Loren's known for. Nevertheless, any character that is currently listed as deceased, I'm going to leave off the list for now because otherwise this video is going to go on forever. Anyways, as I said at the start, the Wood Elves have oodles of named characters left, way more than the Beastman had in the previous video. Regardless of which of these legendary lords ends up in the game down the road, one thing is for sure. Shadow Dancers are long overdue to show up when the Wood Elves finally get their rework to remove the awful implementation of the Amber mechanic.
Wow.
So we'll start this list with the single most well-known Wood Elf character there is, Ariel. She is the wife of Orion and the single most powerful Wood Elf character that exists, far exceeding the power of Durthu and Orion that are already in the game. She's a caster lord and an extremely potent one at that, but unlike most casters, she can also hold her own in combat, especially when she's swapped into her war aspect, which makes her a flying, terrifying butterfly. I could see a campaign mechanic where she can choose to be normal Ariel, which would promote growth, happiness, and leadership, or the war aspect, which would cause chaos corruption in your own territories, but would make her an absolute nightmare to contend with on the battlefield. Sadly, a lot of her lore would need to be ignored in order to put her anywhere on the map except for Athel Loren, which kind of makes her a little problematic for games 2 and 3, but perhaps they could justify it by having her trying to chase down Morgor for the last time. For new stuff, none of it would be themed to her specifically, but just plucking from the more magical side of things would be some of the spites, and I'd personally go with the Luminescence, which would be ethereal creatures that would grant magic damage to all allies within a small radius, as well as Radiance, which would possess huge magic resistance and could potentially cause things like miscast to any caster with activated ability. Lastly, Spellweavers remain a glaring omission and one that would tie in wonderfully with Ariel. Now, while Ariel might be the most requested Wood Elf character, she is certainly not the only requested Wood Elf character, as our next two are frequently requested at the same time as her, Naestra and Arahan, more frequently referred to as the Sisters of Twilight. Unlike any other legendary lord choice, the Sisters of Twilight are always found in a pair, and that owes to their unique ability. Whenever one of them falls in combat, so long as the other one remains alive, the one that fell will revive in pretty short order. There's a ton of great ways to handle such a mechanic, and I would hope, if and when they do end up in the game, CA doesn't fumble this particular aspect of them because it is integral to their identity. Additionally, they also have two named mounts, one being a great eagle, the other being a forest dragon. They would be ranged hybrid lords, though outside of their battle mechanics, I can't really think of any unique campaign mechanics that would truly fit their character. For unique units that could tie in with them, there's actually quite a few fun picks, but one I really like would be the Ghost Riders. These are actually from way back when Warhammer was still an RPG-based game, and would be ranged hero units, which is a niche that's currently occupied by Waystalkers, but there's several ways around that. Either the Ghost Rider could have more diplomatic or campaign focuses rather than out-and-out battle prowess like the Waystalkers, or for example, they could lose the 360 fire arc of the Waystalker and instead have a conventional fire arc, but additional stealth options or additional range or what have you. So our next character is one we've actually spoken of fairly recently, that being Lothlan the Brave. He earned that title in a battle against a teeming horde of Skaven, wherein he retrieved the banner of Athel Loren from its deceased former owner, hopped onto a horse, and charged straight at the rats. As they fled out of his way, the remaining Wood Elf forces took out all the remaining ratmen in the confusion. He'd be pretty easy to justify in the lore, but mechanics could be a bit more difficult. In battle, he would be your definition of a support lord, boosting the prowess and leadership of any Wood Elves nearby. As for new units, we're going to pull double duty from Great Stags, using them as both a mount option for certain Nazarite characters, as well as a basic cavalry unit, as they tie into Lothlan's lore extremely well. Outside of that, I'm not really sure what else to pick for him, because he's kind of in a weird niche where his own lore doesn't really tie in with anything else. However, continuing with characters who are super easy to justify in the new map, though, would be Scarlock. He is a fairly minor character, but he's renowned for tracking threats far outside of Athaloran, and has even warned humans at times to help defend against the enemies of the Wood Elf with them. For campaign mechanics, I'd make him a Horde faction, actually, which would be something that's pretty appropriate for him, but also extraordinarily unique from the Wood Elves. Assuming we get a fix for Amber, CA could do really, really cool stuff like lock additional armies behind an Amber payment, kind of like what the Tomb Kings have with their army caps. In battle, he would be yet another ranged legendary lord. You're going to find this is very common as we go through this list, but due to his relatively open nature, CA could probably just put their own spin on him, and it probably wouldn't really aggravate anyone, because I think a lot of people haven't even heard of him. For new units, I'd go deep into the lore options with Kithband Warriors, given how perfectly they slot in with Skarluk's nature. They'd be a fairly low tier ranged unit option, but you could receive a bonus for any other Kithband units nearby, and it would also be incredibly easy to add a ton of new variants of them too, given that most people don't even know that Kithband Warriors are a thing. So this next one's pretty much going to be a copy-paste of the previous entry, but this is Seolin. He's the oldest Wood Elf warrior that there is, and is another hybrid ranged unit, though in this particular case, he lightly gravitates more towards hand-to-hand combat than he does ranged combat, unlike most others. Just like Skarlock, he is famous for wandering around the world, taking out threats to Athaloran long before they ever make it to the forest itself. He uses an enchanted bronze buckler, yawn, and the Bow of Lauren. A bow that uses Ariel's hair is the drawstring? What? What? It just opens up so many questions. Anyways, for the rest of his stuff, like campaign mechanics and units, it would be the exact same as Skarlock. There'd be no point putting the both of them in, given that both characters do the exact same thing in terms of gameplay and general nature. That's enough small characters for now, though. Let's get back into some bigger names, starting with Deith. He is, well, turned out to be the incarnate of metal, and is the living avatar of Vol, the elven god of crafting. If you've played Mixu's Legendary Lords along with a campaign supplement, you actually have a pretty decent idea about how he'd play for campaign mechanics. He is, after all, a creator. He is one of the best, if not the best, blacksmiths in the entire setting, and is responsible for most of the Wood Elf named weapons in the entire game. Given that there's multiple Anvils of Vol in the map, there's one for each elven faction, he'd be a super easy to justify being to take away from Athaloran. Alternatively, they could also just give him a crest regarding the Widowmaker sword. Perhaps he has a quest to destroy it forever, or tame it, or do something, and that could also get him outside of Athaloran quite easily. For new units, there's nothing particularly appropriate to him, so rather than trying to force a square peg into a round hole, we're just going to leave his additions blank. So that's one of Mixu's Legendary Lord Wood Elf characters. Let's take a look at his other one, Nayef. She is adept at predicting the future, which could lend itself pretty easily to campaign mechanics. You could, for example, get a choice of a few different quest options, as well as what will happen if you succeed or fail at any of the quests you take. It also makes for a really, really easy lore justification to get her outside of Athaloran. In battle, she would be a mage, though not a particularly powerful one. Instead, picture her more as like a really good scout unit with some magic to help steer things in the right direction when needed. For new units, we're going to dip back into the spites, and we're going to call on Mischiefs and Terrors. The former would debuff the melee stats and speed of squads they're in combat with, which would make them an awesome unit to harass and annoy your enemy with. The latter would, unsurprisingly, cause terror and would have an aura that causes damage to any fleeing enemies in the area. Alright, we're going to move on to an extremely well-known Wood Elf character now, this being the Angry Tree herself, Draika. She's a psychopath, even by forest spirit standards, and has been known to go against the rulings of the Wood Elves, making her an extremely easy justification to slot somewhere else on the map. She'd almost assuredly have terrible relations with everyone, Wood Elves included, and I could see her getting a campaign-wide bonus for getting to certain kill counts, kind of like what Crone Hellebron has with Slavery. In battle, she'd play like a really pissed-off tree would, just a giant infantry blender, and one likely that would have terror to boot. She would also have access to the Lore of Shadows, but really, if you're taking her as a caster, you're doing it wrong. For new units, the Wildkin could be fun, spooky ghost trees, and they'd also fit her aesthetic really, really well. The Trigera, picture praying mantises on steroids, would also fit in really well with her style of murder everything not made of wood, and could be a really, really cool looking addition to the series. They would have terrible sight ranges, they're actually blind insects, but would cause fear in close quarters combat and, again, be infantry blenders, kind of like Draika herself. Alright, we'll stick with an upset tree for our next pick too, Kodal. Along with Dirthu, he is the last of the surviving Treemen Elders. There actually used to be 3, they're now down to 2. His campaign experience is a super unique one, so much like Draika, he has absolutely no love for the inhabitants of Athel Loren and was actively imprisoned there until she broke him out. He'd have little to offer outside of being another giant murder tree with some amazing lore implications. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but again, it's hard to justify new units or anything else like that with him given how little there is about him in the first place. And we'll take a look at the last of the big bark boys with the Madry Ironbark, formerly known as a Madry Dawnspear. Back in the day, he was just a normal, boring old Glade Lord that unfortunately got tortured to death by Daemonettes, but thanks to the curse they placed on him where he couldn't die until they were done torturing him, he didn't actually die. He just became a treekin and then immediately made those Daemonettes regret their decision. Nowadays, he's a pretty cool guy, kills daemons and doesn't afraid of anything. Unfortunately, his lore puts him squarely in Athel Loren, and he would be yet another treekin lord. Maybe a free DLC candidate one day, but probably not a DLC one. Anyways, that's enough vegetation. Let's get back to some elfy boys, starting with Ska! He's a very bird-themed dude. He is literally covered in feathers and uses a whip with bird talons as a weapon. Like, yeah, he picked a theme and he stuck with it. He's a scout for Athel Loren, so getting him out and about in the map is certainly easy to justify from a lore perspective. What's harder to do would be to figure out what he would actually have that would set him apart. I could see a campaign mechanic where he'd have to go and occupy specific territories, and in doing so you could give him reinforcements, kind of like what the Imperial reinforcement campaign thing works like for Marcus Wolfhart. Or you could also give him site bonuses for each of those territories taken over, so eventually you could effectively see the entire map. In combat, he'd be a fast melee unit with likely a couple bound spells pertaining to birds, and again, probably pretty good scouting capabilities and probably bonuses to his flying units in his army. And what better unit that you could tie in with him than with the Shrikes? They are tiny little sprites that fly on the backs of blackbirds. God, say that 5 times fast. While not necessarily thematic, you could also add in Netlings, because they would tie in nicely from a gameplay perspective. They're a spite with the ability to lock down enemy squads using spider webs, which would let your cavalries, archers, and flying units quickly annihilate them. Alright, that's one bird brain down. Let's take a look at another. Thalandor Doomstar. Okay, first off, what kind of idiot parent names their kid Thalandor Doomstar? That's gotta be the stupidest name I've heard since XAEA12. Yeah, calling you out, Musk. Anyways, he has been all over the place fighting greenskins and undead, the latter of which actually killed him once, but his ego's pretty bro tier and fought through a bunch of carrion to bring him back to Athel Loren, and in turn he revived from that. From a campaign and new units perspective, he would effectively be a clone of Ska, so there's not really a point in having the two of them. You would just pick one or the other. The only difference between them would be primarily in battle, where Thalandor is a mounted spearman rather than a footlord with a whip. Finishing out with our flying-themed guys, we have Eraloth. He exists. He's a fairly late addition to the Wood Elves lore and unfortunately suffers from being a Matt Ward addition to the lore. He was a coward for most of his life, but stepped up to save an elf maiden from a daemon. That maiden turned out to be Liliath, who made him her champion, and his personality to complete 180 from then on out. As I said, not really particularly interested in their lore. Like most things Matt Ward touches, it's pretty atrocious. They could be justified being sent pretty much anywhere because he is completely 100% subservient to Ariel, but as for what unique mechanics, I'm not entirely sure what you would do there. I mean, listen, he's a character, and to boot, he's one of the current 8th edition army books, no less. It's just, I can't find any reason to put him in that excites me. Alright, this last entry on the list I debated taking off the list probably about a dozen times now, but in the end I've decided to leave him on. Oh, Jesus Christ. Quindalmanlai. Okay, first off, whoever came up with that last name deserves a crack square upside the head. Do you know how hard that is to say in one take? Anyways, Trancast is unique among this entire list in how decidedly unlike a Wood Elf he is. They live outside of Athel Loren, they actually live amongst humans no less. They're not really a combatant and have pretty much nothing to do with the rest of the Wood Elves. You might be sitting there thinking that would make for a terrible Legendary Lord pick, but I would argue they would actually be one of the most unique Legendary Lords ever added to the game if so. You would have a campaign focused on making contacts and allies. Rather than venturing into wars yourself, you would try to get other people to do it in your stead. And in case you did need to go to battle, Trancast would again be pretty unlike most Wood Elves. He would be a close quarters duelist, though he'd be about as durable as wet tissue paper like the rest of the Wood Elves, which would again make for a very different campaign or battle experience. For new units, I guess we'd just simply pull what's left, which would be unicorns. Again, they could be both a mount option as well as an unmounted cavalry variant. And the last of the spites, these being malevolence. They're a ranged poison variant of the little tiny forest spirits. So, in case you're wondering where your favorite Wood Elf character is, I left quite a few of them off the list for various reasons. So, Aliador Truesight, Atherian of the Red Horn, Kalanoth the Blade, and Alyssa were just too minor to even bother including. Carillion and Waywitch the Wild I left off due to a lack of Lord status. They would be heroes at best. Alisara is completely 100% dead due to the unfortunate status of being Malekith's wife. Gruarth is also listed as currently dead due to being a good guy in a Wood Elf setting. Continuing with our deaths, Adenhue, the last of the three Wood Elf the Treekin elders, he's dead due to being involved with Morathi and Ariel's little hissy fit that they had there. Athelowin's dead due to trying to get into a scrap with the Bretonnians in the Bretonnian zone setting. Didn't go so well. And the last of these, Shadow Fist, it only makes sense as a hero unit at best. Anyways, that's it for this one, though, and holy hell was this ever a lot of work. For the next week's one, I'm moving over to the Game 2 DLC races, mostly because I'm impatient and there's some really fun stuff there that I want to cover, so stay tuned for those. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next week.